I am Kat Swetel, and this talk is a feminist outlook on digital transformation. Yes, so in order to understand what I mean by a feminist outlook on digital transformation, first we should probably understand what feminism is, what a feminist outlook would be. So this is the definition that I like to use. Part of it is from Bell Hooks. Feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. And then I like what Celia Harkwell adds on, which is that feminism is a movement to establish political, social, and economic equality and create a world where all people flourish. I really like the last part where we're focused on what could be a world where all people flourish. So I like to mash those up into one definition. And for the record, that's also what C.B. Harkwell recommends, mashing them up. Okay, so now that is feminism. We understand what feminism is. Let's understand what digital transformation is. Lots of people using this phrase, not a lot of people meaning the same thing. I don't think it's just turning the things that we do into ones and zeros. We already have a lot of things that are digital. I think digital transformation is something really specific where it is the idea that we have the capability to construct and maintain relationships in digital place. So that would be a socially constructed place that we have constructed digitally. That is what I mean when I talk about digital transformation. And I think if you think about your experiences in the world, it will make sense. Right now, lots of the ways that you conduct business will not be just single transactions, but you will be treated as a customer that persists across transactions. So for example, I even have the app for my grocery store where I'm not treated as just an anonymous transaction when I go into the grocery store, but I have coupons that are specifically for me, deals that are specifically for me. They're tracking my transactions across and kind of maintaining this loyalty and this relationship with me personally. So that's what I mean when I talk about digital transformation. We're now free to construct and maintain relationships that are not constrained by physical place. So I don't have to be near someone in order to have a relationship with them. I don't have to be near a company in order to have a relationship with them. We can construct relationships in this digital place, which is very cool. But it begs the question, how did we get here? Like, why is digital transformation happening right now? And the short answer is basically that right now, we are actually capable of digital transformation, whereas before we were not. So I think that people naturally like to conduct business in a relationship-based way. So, you can imagine a time, or maybe you remember a time or you've lived in a place where business was more based on relationships. You have a local grocer or a tavern or something like that where you hang out. The proprietor knows you and you know them, and it is very natural to have relationship-based business there. I think that's what we are getting back to. Technology kind of pushed us in the direction of a very transactional approach. And now we have the technological capability to enable relationships. So I will explain how we got here using the idea of evolution. So on the screen, you'll see kind of a line that goes from technology that is in Genesis. This is where we look at something we don't even know what the heck it's for or how we would use it. It's just kind of novel and cool. And then there are things that are commodity, like electricity. You don't even notice it until it's broken or absent. It's totally just a commodity, a utility. And you're not usually for these things looking for like artisanal electricity, you may care about the source, but one unit is kind of exactly the same as the other. All right, so what happened to enable digital transformation? First, we have these computers that arrive on the scene, and at first it is more like a novelty. People are only seeing really limited application, and there are kind of naysayers who say like these computing machines will never be ubiquitous, but that turns out to be completely false. We see widespread adoption of computers, both personal computers and computers in businesses. And so we see the evolution of computers. It becomes much cheaper to get a computer. So it's not like everyone in your community getting time on the same computer. Anyone can have a computer. Computers are in all businesses. Once that happens, once computers start to evolve and become more ubiquitous, what we see is that there's the realization that they're not just good for like crunching numbers, but also for facilitating transactions. So now you can facilitate transactions in your business with a computer, and that is awesome. And we see that happen more and more and more, which then puts some pressure on computers and compute to evolve again. And it just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper to compute, and it gets cheaper and cheaper to store data because it's evolving. It's becoming much more commodity. We're thinking now about economies of scale. So once it's much cheaper to compute and to store data, now we don't have to be judicious about what data we are storing or what information we're collecting about those transactions, how long we're storing the data, because compute and storing data is so much cheaper and transactions are much more repeatable. We now can create and store all of this data about those transactions and about what is happening in our businesses. So we kind of have this, like the rise of big data, and that evolves as well, right? So initially, big data is like a novel thing. Everyone's talking about it. We don't actually know, like, what are you going to do with that big data? You can afford to store all of this data. You can afford to compute things based on this data, but we're not totally sure what the heck are we going to do with that. But the idea of big data starts to evolve as well. And we realize, hey, this would be much more useful if we could get data and do computations in real time. Okay, so then we can't just have data sitting over there in some really static kind of place. We need to be able to flow data to where it makes sense. So now we have like event-driven architectures, and we have data streaming. We have things like Kafka popping up. So now we can, in real time, stream data where it needs to be in order to enable relationships, right? Because a key thing about relationships is that it is persistent across touch points, and kind of a relationship has its own attributes that are different from any of the individual transactions. So now that we can move data around and make sense of the data in real time, we now can support relationships. We can construct relationships because we have that element of real time, and then we're able to also persist things. So what a magical world we live in. right? We now have digital transformation. We're in this digital place. That means that we can construct digital assets and we can kind of shed some of the nastiness that is physical scarcity, right? We can leave a little bit of that behind because we have this ubiquitous compute. We're able to store lots of data. We can construct these relationships and we can exchange value in a digital manner. So now we live in this utopia where there's no such thing as physical scarcity, right? Unfortunately not, for a lot of reasons. But for me, the most troubling reason, it has to do with this number. I'll give you a second to think about what is this number, 21 million? Some of you will realize that this is the limit on the number of Bitcoins. Loads of fun. So what we are doing now in a digital place where we can exchange value digitally, there's really no need to have to mimic the physical scarcity that we have in the physical world. However, what is happening here is that people who are very well served by the old system that is based on physical scarcity, and that's why things have value. Why does gold have value? Because it's scarce. It's physically scarce. There's nothing inherently awesome about it. It's just physically scarce. So the people that are very well served by that old system that is based on value derived from physical scarcity, they are reenacting that system now in a digital world needlessly. It doesn't exist in the digital world. We are reenacting it. We are programmatically mimicking some of the least desirable things about our world that exists right now, and we're making those things true for the future. So this is going to be a theme of this talk, and this is why I'm excited about this event and this audience, because the only way that we're going to move past this is by hearing from people who are not well served by the old system. That is the only way that truly transformational change can happen. It will not be a digital transformation unless we are digitally enacting truly transformative ideas, not just digitally enacting the same old ideas. So now we can go through some examples. I have little pieces of examples that are interesting about what is possible in a digital place and what is currently happening. So the first one has to do with customization. Yes, we now, because we can flow all of this data around in real time and we can make really interesting things happen even in our supply chains based on this. So now we have these ideas of customization and they are designed to make you buy more and or to make you buy more frequently. So the first idea is mass customization, and this is where whatever I buy, when I buy it, is customized to me. So if you have like a custom pair of shoes that you ordered that have some custom design on them, lots of brands are doing this now, Nike, Vans, whatever. That would be an example of mass customization. So it is customized at the time that you buy it for you. Late customization is where you buy something and then after you buy it, it becomes customized for you. And the most familiar example of this is a phone. So it used to be when I first got a cell phone, you getting a new phone was like an ordeal. You know, you copied over phone numbers. Eventually it got where you could like go in the store and have someone copy over phone numbers for you. But a lot of it was copying over phone numbers. Eventually it got to the point where you're like reinstalling apps, logging into a bunch of accounts or anything like that. But if you bought a phone anytime recently, you will have had an extremely different experience, right? Now you buy this phone that's completely a blank slate, right? There's nothing customized about it. In fact, it doesn't even have a physical keyboard because the keyboard will even be customized just for you. So you get this new phone, you log in with whatever service, whether it's Android and Google or it's Apple and your Apple ID, and you log in, and pretty much immediately that phone becomes customized for you, right? It'll copy over your contacts, and in most cases, it'll copy over your apps, everything like that. So that is an example of late customization. And even the keyboard, like I was saying, depending on where you live or what language you have selected for your phone, that will even be customized. So this customization, like I said, it's designed in a lot of cases to decrease the friction on you buying something new. So we want to incentivize you to buy, and we want you to buy frequently. Whether you need a new phone or not, think of how easy it'll be to get a new phone. Think of how easy it'll be to get a new tablet. There's nothing stopping you. Just throw the cash down and get the new device, whatever it is. So this customization is possible because of the advances that we've had in technology that I mentioned earlier. Now I challenge you to think, what if we use this power of customization to provide care instead of prompting people to consume? There's this philosopher, great thinker that I like to read and be inspired by, called Carol Gilligan, and she has this idea of an ethic of care, and that is an ethics of care directs our attention to the need for responsiveness in relationships, paying attention, listening, responding, and to the cost of losing connection with oneself or with others. So instead of just incentivizing you to consume without even thinking, what if we were instead incentivized to connect again with ourselves and be conscious of what we actually need and be conscious of what our community needs? And what if those customizations were driving us to be conscious of how we can provide care, how we can be responsive in relationships in a way that is generative? That, with the technology that we have right now, that paradigm is possible, and I'm really excited by it. And I think that there are ways that we can enact this as technology workers. So what I like to think about is are the things that we are making, we know they're making people more productive. Like, this generation of workers is the most productive generation that has ever existed in history. And we've done that through technology. So now what if we use technology to facilitate the reproductive work, which is the work of care, where we care for each other, we care for the next generation, we care for ourselves. That to me is so exciting. And it challenges us to think about morality a bit differently, right? So historically, again, we've kind of had this transactional mindset where how do we demonstrate that we have matured from a moral development point of view? We demonstrate that because we make good choices. Well, what if we were demonstrating that in the way that we care? What if moral development meant that we had a more sophisticated ability to care and realize that care is not just self-sacrifice, it's caring for ourselves and it's caring for our community, and realizing that both of those interests at some point are one. So the technology that we have right now, it could enable an ethic of care, but right now we're using it to, again, center choice, like make the choice to buy this thing, make good choices. All right. going along with care, let's talk about community and belonging. This is terrific. Now we have digital communities. I can connect with people that aren't physically close to me at all, but are close to me in my beliefs and my values. And that is so special, isn't it? It definitely is. It's also terrible, as we've recently witnessed. So humans are so interesting in that we have this kind of innate thing that we do across lots of different cultures. It seems like it's just a thing that keeps popping up, where we like to one-up each other in the form of stories. And the example that I always think of, because this is a thing that happened to me many times when I was growing up, is fishing stories. So one person says, I caught a fish this big. Oh, it was, a great catch. I was fishing all day. I was so happy when I got it. Was able to be dinner for me and my friend, whatever. And the next person says, yeah, well, I caught a fish this big. And it took me hardly any time to catch it. It fed my whole family for dinner. And the next person said, I caught a fish this big and I couldn't even pull it up onto the boat, right? So we have this need to kind of one up each other, and the stories become more and more extreme and less credible. Now, the behavior that we can see in digital places like Twitter is where we have bots or non-human entities engaging in that same diding behavior, the one-upping behavior in the story. So, a person or a bot might tweet something and then someone comes and one-ups it. And it really doesn't take a huge bot network to suddenly cause this crystallization in viewpoints. It can just be a few bots that are kind of throwing a little bit of fuel on the flames, and then people on these social networks will one up each other until it is a very extreme position. And we've seen this recently in a lot of ways. Some of the things that are associated with cancel culture, whether you believe in that or not, right? That can end up in an extreme position. And certainly in the elections and votes that we've had recently, especially in the United States and in the United Kingdom, we have seen that, right? Where one person takes position and then we have either bots or humans taking a more extreme position more and more and more. And these social networks are set up to drive engagement. So they are actually set up to feature that. And in some social networks, you don't even have the option to see things in a chronological view on your timeline. You can only see things in the view that is provided from that social network, the view that is designed to drive engagement. And it doesn't matter if it's responsible engagement or if it's engagement that drives one of these crystallized viewpoints. It does not matter, right? They're just trying to drive engagement. So they're going to show you the thing that will cause you to engage with that thread, which will probably be something that drives a big emotional response in you, not necessarily the thing that drives you to be more thoughtful, right? There's this great book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, that goes into a huge amount of detail on this. So if you're curious, I highly recommend it. Terrific book. But this is a quote. It is no longer enough to automate information flows about us. The goal is now to automate us. So the goal is to get you to engage, whether it's engage with a political candidate, whether it's to engage with a political idea, whether it's to engage with some sort of retailer selling something. The goal is to automate you. It's not to provide you with a chance to think, The goal is to make you do a certain thing without thinking at all. And that to me is horrifying. For me, that feels like we are being stripped of what makes us human, right? What our free will is, which is where we are conscious of the way that we arrive at our decisions. Otherwise, we are just programmed to do certain things. So that's a really negative thing that can happen out there when people are looking for belonging and they're looking for community. They're looking for people that have the same views and values as they do. But there's also an incredibly positive thing that can happen when you can connect with other people and exchange stories. In philosophy, there's this idea of epistemic injustice, which is where you are wronged in your capacity as a knower of things. And there's a flavor of that called hermeneutical injustice. And that's when you are wronged in your capacity as the subject of social understanding. So what does that mean? That means that you are not contributing to the narratives that we understand as a society. So if you are a woman in technology, your narrative about what it means to be a technical worker is marginalized in a lot of ways. It's not the default, right? The default, and there's plenty of TV shows about this. There's so many things. The default is like the white guy in a hoodie, right? And if you're a woman of color in technology, you are marginalized even further. There are not a lot of stories for you to use to make sense of what you're experiencing day to day. What if we could use our ability to connect on these social networks and use it to exchange stories in a way that validates each other's experience? So we come up with the words, or we share the words that help us make sense of our experience, which is consciousness raising, right? And I personally have seen this happen in online communities. So there are a couple of groups that I'm a part of online in a digital place, right? That are for mothers, for parents. And I have seen people share stories about postpartum depression. And I've seen other mothers realize that that's what's happening to them. They're not a bad mom. There's nothing defective about them in that way. It's just they are going through a thing that is known, right? But if you don't have the language to recognize and describe that experience, you might think that it is not something that is shared and it's something specifically wrong with you. So what I am really interested in is how we can use these social networks and online community spaces to exchange stories that are not the dominant narrative, so that people who are marginalized can make sense of their experience and can create collective meaning, and then use that to interact with the narratives that are dominant and just show there is a plurality of narratives out there, right? There are all these different narratives and they are all valid and really important for us going into a new digital paradigm. So again, if we want to get a lot of information about what could be, then it is really important for us to listen to the stories from people who are marginalized by what is right now, because that's where the transformational stories will come from. Perhaps you have heard of this, and I think it's really valuable for understanding further that idea of surveillance capitalism. If you're not paying for something, if you're not the paying customer, then you're the product. I don't even think that that is true anymore. Uh, People like to say things about that when we talk about social networks. I don't think that that's true. I strongly believe in the idea that is presented in the age of surveillance capitalism, this idea of behavioral surplus, where you are actually the raw goods going into the system to be reconfigured and processed into value. So your behavior on these social networks and in digital place, your behavior is mined. I just love that we're carrying forward this metaphor of mining, whether it's mining behavior, mining cryptocurrency. But I think it fits because it does match the extremely extractive paradigm that we're kind of striking here. So it's not anymore that we are just extracting raw materials from the world, and that's, you take those raw materials, you combine them, you process them in a certain way, and you end up with something that is more valuable than those raw materials. Now you and I are the raw materials. Our behavior is taken, it's aggregated up, and it is transformed in some way that is then sold back to us, right? And we are not compensated for that raw material. So I always crack up when people say that we should be paying for Twitter, paying for Facebook. We should just be happy that it's free. I'm not happy that it's free because they are extracting value from my life. They're extracting this raw material that is my behavior. And then they are looking at it in the scope of social networks. They're looking at it in the scope of decision making. They're aggregating that. They're claiming these insights. And then they are using that to manipulate my behavior and sell things to me, whether it is an idea or it is a product. My behavior was extracted and then used to imbue that with value. And I think that that is horrible and not at all what should be, right? And we have seen this happen in some really scary ways, right? What is the common mode of operating and of coming up with ways to engage communities if you're on a political campaign now, right? A lot of it is this micro targeting where we're going to take slogans like Make America Great Again, which has been a slogan for, 30 years or something like that now. But we're going to test all of these potential slogans with people that would have a disproportionate influence on their community. We're going to test things. We're going to test little sound bites like build a wall or whatever the case may be, and see how they cause people and their emotions to change and their decision-making ability to change. And that, to me, is both stripping us of choice and care, right? We are not consciously making choices. We're not being presented with options and making choices. We're being programmed to choose a certain thing. And it is not coming from a place of care, right? We're not being encouraged to care for ourselves. We're not being encouraged to care for our communities. We're not even being encouraged to check in with ourselves to see how we are doing or what these choices are going to lead to as far as the consequences for each one of us personally and for our communities. So I feel like it is extremely unethical, and also it is just pulling forward the extractive paradigm that we have in the physical world, where we get value by stripping something else of value, because there is a finite amount of whatever these goods are. And so if I have some of them, that means you don't. In a digital place, that is not true. It is simply not true, right? Information can exist in multiple places. Because I have that information doesn't mean that you don't have that information. So this extractive paradigm is not at all relevant, right? And if you want to read a great novel about how badly this could go, I highly recommend this one, Parable of the Talents, where the kind of the villain or one of the villains even uses slogans that are being used today, events that are actually happening today. Octavia Butler wrote about in the 90s. So I've drawn these comparisons for you, right, between scarcity and abundance. And we don't have to carry forward scarcity into this digital place. I've drawn the comparison between consumption and care. And we don't have to do things only for the purpose, the number one purpose of consuming, right? We consume within the scope of care. I drew the comparison between the crystallization of culture that we see in these extreme beliefs with the idea of hermeneutical justice, where we get to share and appreciate a wide variety of experience, and we get to validate a lot of different experience and be exposed to different experience. And then we're kind of closing out with this extraction versus a generative paradigm. And there's no need for us to continue to carry forward that extractive paradigm in a digital place. It is not necessary. So what is the example of generative? Because I've given you an example of all the others. I don't have it, right? That's the thing about taking a generative stance, is that you imagine things that have not existed before, right? So it's not that we are all fighting for our slice of the pie. It's just that we're making the whole pie bigger. And I think that we are, in a lot of ways, kind of approaching this here and there, right? We have some things where we're increasing transparency a lot by conducting that business in a digital place, or having open data, or whatever the case may be. I feel like that's a very generative stance, because it doesn't assume that owning that information is somehow taking it away from you, right? How data produces value is that we exchange it and it moves. It has value when it's moving. I like the idea personally. I like the idea of distributed ledgers, right? That's a very interesting twist on cryptocurrency, because we can perhaps facilitate transactions across borders in a way that may not have been totally possible before. And we can transact in a way that is more transparent, where we understand how the transactions are happening, which is something that doesn't exist for a lot of us in a lot of places. And I think what recently happened with GameStop stock, that is a great example, because we don't understand how stock trading transactions are batched. That's not transparent to all of us. What if it was? What if we understood how those transactions are handled, literally how they're handled? Now, in a digital place, there's no reason that we shouldn't have that information and be able to see that code. So I want to encourage all of you to remember that your stories are so important, and your experience is so important. And we have to be willing to challenge ourselves and challenge each other when we are reproducing the things that were in a brand new system. And this is something that like I personally, as a white woman, have to remember a lot, right? Because there are ways that the current system serves me very well, but it can be something that is much better for that. And we can think about all people flourishing, which is ultimately better for every single one of us. And so I hope that we can challenge ourselves, we challenge each other to point out when we have been really well served by the thing that used to exist and how something new might serve us better, even if it's a little bit scary to face that disruption. So I'll leave you with this. I think that in a digital space where we're exchanging information, we're exchanging data, and that information and data gets more value the more it moves around. We can move from the idea of power being power over. I have power over you, and we derive power from being higher in a hierarchy. I think now in a digital place, we can practice power with, right? I can exchange stories with other people. We can use those stories to do great things. And that is power to. And I think that power to is possible in a way now that it hasn't perhaps historically been possible, where we can think about when we get together, we can orient around a goal and say, what do we have the power to do? And we don't need to exert power over others. We can all choose to bring ourselves together to have power with each other and power to accomplish things that have never been accomplished before in human history. So I'll leave you with that. I'm very thankful to be here with all of you today, and I hope to engage some of you in conversation sometime soon. Thank you.